the last video, we talked about variables and how to use them in diagram. We did this simple kind of made variables. You made some ints and we added them together and assigned the int variable back to it, and then we logged that out to the console using a debug log so that we could see the results of that, because we're not doing anything fancy here. We just want to see that it works. One thing I want to show you is you can marquee select all of these things. You can select all of them by just dragging, and I'm going to select them all. I just deleted them there. But what we want to talk about now is events. And events are a system in Unity. If you've used Unity before, these should be very familiar. You should be able to, start. We have update, and if you haven't used Unity, update happens all the time. Start happens once when the object begins updating or when it comes to life, and update will tick at your frames per second. So like 60 times per second. Start happens once. Update will be like a machine gun that keeps moving, updating over and over and over and over and over again, like your main loop. And we have other functionality that Unity has, like fixed update, which you use for physics. There's late update. We have on collision enter. If I hit something with a collider that wasn't a trigger, on trigger enter, if I hit something with a collider that was a trigger. And these are all events that Unity has built in that you would use in scripting, but it gets called here as the events happen. So that just events, logic will flow out of those first nodes there, and we'll start the process. When something hits a trigger, that's going to fire off, and we can start saying, when you hit the trigger, let's start doing logic here so that we can make things happen when you hit a trigger. And so this is how you add all these up here. You can see we can do visibility again. Sometimes if we have a lot of those, you're going to see that they can get crowded. So having visibility, we can delete them from there, or we can delete them from up here. The same functionality with those little 3-line menu bar for each of these things. And they all have their own graph. It's all organized very well so that it doesn't get cluttered. If you know this is where all your stuff for fixed update's going to be, it would go into here. Same with update, same with start. And we can organize. It has a really nice organization to it. In code, you would see all this in one kind of class. But I'm going to delete all of these so that we can go over the other part associated with this. These are all Unity events, meaning that Unity handles them when Unity wants to handle them. So Unity handles update, and Unity handles start, and on collision enter, and on trigger enter. But we can also make our own events, and we call them functions. We're going to make our own functions here. And I've created my own function here, and since we added ints last time with the variables, I'm just going to make a function that does the same thing called int adder. Stupid name, but it's appropriate. And I need things to come into this, so I want information to come into this function. So I'm going to add two things, and the two things I need to add two ints, I need two ints. So I'm going to make two int variables. I'm going to call it int a and int b for my two variables that come in. And then I need to return the result. So the return type I want is also going to be an int, because two ints added together give me an int. So this is just going to be the result. And these are what functions are. Functions are kind of magic boxes that take information in, do some magic inside of them, and then spit a result out. And as I do that, you can see a new tab came up called int adder, and it has the two ints that I'm going to pass into it, and a result out that is also turquoise, so you can see that it's an int also. And I have to do the magic in between these two things. I have to do the code to add the ints in between this. So if I take the two ints that are coming in and put out the result of that, that is this simple function. I just have to hook it up, because unless the execution plugs have to be hooked up, or they don't flow, they don't do anything. So this function can now be called where I want it to happen, and it will add these two ints together. Whatever I pass in, doesn't matter what I pass in, it'll add any two ints and put them out to the result there. And I know this is very simple, but it's a good way to show what we're doing with our little custom function here. And so I can call this function by, well, I can make a new variable. I don't need to, but I'm going to make one. Other int, I'll make one here, just so I can show it to you guys. And I can make it 1 there also, much like we did before in the last video. And I can call this function. You'll see there's a new tab there because I made a function. It's a function tab. And just like variables, I can drop it down. And any functions I've made in here, you'll be able to see my int adder. And I can call this function by passing in the ints that I want. It's going to add them and pass out a result. So the int I want is my int, is the first int. I'll drag off of that, get my int, and then I'm going to add to it other int. And I have to hook up the execution for it, or it won't go. And then I'm just going to log out the result of that. I know this looks very similar to what we did with just the variables using add in there, but now it's just going to give me the result of these two things. And I'm not storing this variable like I did last time. I'm just adding them and catching and just logging out the result itself. So you should see, since those are both 1, you should see 2 down here, which we do. That function ran its magic inside and spit out the answer that we wanted. And this could be anything. If we change this to 10, that value is going to be 10. You could see it if you hover over the variable itself. You could see the value if you've assigned them already. But if we hit this now, this should be 11. There it is, 11. And you don't have to. So I made another variable to pass in here, but I don't need to. If I didn't want to make another variable, we use something called assign if we just want to assign a temporary value to something. So if I just want to do that, I could use an assign. I could put 100 in here. And now I'm not using that variable. I can get rid of it. But I'm just using a temporary assigned int that I want to add to this. And now this should be 101. There's 101. So these functions, you can use them. You can make any functions you want. Any functionality you want to go into these functions. They're very good for code that you don't want to replicate over and over and over again. They're also very good for making, not cluttering up your graph so that I don't have to have these huge chunks of code. I can put smaller chunks of code into these functions and call them as needed. And I don't have to have all of this stuff in this graph. Just break it up into my own functions, stuff that I can pass in, make code much more reusable, make functions reusable. And again, they're just boxes that we create that we pass in information, the parameters, just like you would in a function that you called in C#, and they spit out a return value. And that return value is all the work they did inside of them. They give the return value out. There's the plus I did, that's the work, and the result is there. Now, obviously, this is very simple, but we can make them as advanced as we want in there. I just wanted to use a simple version of this to show you guys the functionality of creating your own functions.